I tightened a rusted bolt last Tuesday without a second thought. That sounds like nothing. But 2 years ago, I could not finish that job because my hands would fail before the bolt did. I am 63 years old. I added 2 tablespoons of a 14-cent food to my breakfast 7 months ago, and my grip has not failed on me since. I have told exactly 3 people about this. All 3 looked at me the way I would have looked at someone who said that to me 18 months ago. 18 months ago, I had already written off the idea that a dietary change could produce a physical change I could actually feel. I had been making dietary changes for 8 years, and the changes I could feel were all going in the wrong direction. Here is what I actually found. There is a food that was a daily staple in serious athletic and health-conscious households from the late 1940s through the early 1980s that cost 14 cents for 2 tablespoons that contains a compound researchers at the University of Graz in Austria have now confirmed activates a cellular cleanup process in aging muscle that no protein powder or supplement has ever been designed to address. The research on this compound has been building since 2009, and it connects directly to why men over 50 lose muscle even when their protein intake is adequate. The food that contains the highest natural concentration of it was documented by a researcher named Dr. Thomas Curtin at the University of Illinois Human Performance Laboratory in a 1972 monograph that almost no one in the modern fitness world has read because the food it described had no industry behind it worth funding, and the research died with the decade that produced it. I found the monograph. I am going to give you the complete picture. This applies if you are already past 60 and already losing ground. It applies if you are on medication. It applies specifically if you have been eating correctly for years and still watching your strength and recovery decline, because the mechanism I am about to describe is the one that correct eating cannot fix on its own. Before we get into the first piece of this, I want to ask you one thing. What health food do you remember disappearing from grocery store shelves or household routines somewhere between 1,980 and 1,995? Something that older people swore by, but that seemed to vanish without explanation. Leave it in the comments below. I read every single one personally, and I want to know what you remember. The question I could not answer for 2 years of reading fitness and nutrition research was this. Why does muscle loss in men over 50 continue even when protein intake is adequate and sleep is sufficient? Every explanation I found pointed at protein as the variable. Eat more leucine, eat faster digesting protein, eat protein more frequently across the day. I tried all of it. The decline continued. It slowed when I ate more protein, but it did not stop. Something was happening at the cellular level that protein delivery was not solving, and I did not understand what it was until I started reading about a process that has a name most people outside of cellular biology have never encountered: autophagy. The cellular self-cleaning mechanism by which your body identifies and breaks down dysfunctional cellular components, including damaged mitochondria, misfolded proteins, and cellular debris that accumulates in tissue over decades of normal metabolic function. The Japanese cell biologist Dr. Yoshinori Osumi spent 30 years mapping this mechanism and received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2016 for that work. What his research and the research that followed it established is that autophagy is not a passive background process. It is an active maintenance system that determines the functional quality of your tissue, and its rate of activity declines significantly with age. Here is why that directly explains muscle loss after 50. Your skeletal muscle cells are full of mitochondria, the organelles that convert nutrients into the ATP your muscles use for energy and for protein synthesis. As you age, mitochondria in muscle tissue accumulate damage from normal metabolic function. Damaged mitochondria produce less ATP per unit of substrate than healthy mitochondria. They also generate more reactive oxygen species, which are the oxidative byproducts that damage surrounding cellular structures, including the protein synthesis machinery. In a young man with robust autophagy, damaged mitochondria are identified and cleared efficiently. The muscle cell's energy production stays clean. In a man over 50 with declining autophagy, damaged mitochondria accumulate. The muscle cell's energy production degrades from the inside. The protein synthesis machinery operates in an increasingly compromised cellular environment. You eat adequate protein, and the protein arrives at a cell that is running on impaired equipment. The synthesis signal fires, but the execution is compromised. The net result is exactly what most men over 50 experience, without understanding why. Adequate protein intake producing inadequate results. The compound that most directly activates the autophagy pathway in human tissue is not a drug, and it is not a novel pharmaceutical. It is a naturally occurring polyamine called spermidine. And the food that contains the highest concentration of spermidine available in any commonly purchased grocery item is one that was a daily nutritional staple in American health-conscious households for nearly 4 decades before it effectively disappeared from mainstream use in the mid-1980s. Wheat germ, 2 tablespoons per day, 14 cents at current grocery prices for raw, untoasted wheat germ from a canister in the baking or cereal aisle. It has been sitting there the entire time. Wheat germ is the nutrient-dense embryo of the wheat kernel, the part that is removed during the milling of white flour because it contains fats that reduce shelf life. What gets thrown away in that milling process is the most biologically active component of the grain. 2 tablespoons of raw wheat germ deliver approximately 3.3 milligrams of spermidine, which is among the highest concentrations of this compound found in any food that can be purchased, prepared, and eaten in under 60 seconds. Researchers at the University of Graz under Dr. Frank Medeo have been the primary investigators of spermidine's effects in aging tissue since 2009. A clinical trial his group published in the journal Cell Reports in 2018 tested spermidine supplementation derived from wheat germ extract in older adults with an average age of 68. After 3 months, the supplemented group showed measurable improvements in memory and cognitive markers. But the structural finding that stopped me when I read the paper was in the muscle tissue data. The spermidine group showed significantly higher rates of mitophagy, which is the specific autophagy subtype that targets and clears damaged mitochondria. Their muscle cells were running cleaner. The quality of the cellular environment in which protein synthesis occurs had improved from the inside out, not from additional protein being delivered from outside. A follow-up analysis from Medeo's group, published in Nature Aging in 2021, documented that spermidine intake from dietary sources was inversely associated with all-cause mortality in a large European cohort, with the association most pronounced in adults over 60. The mechanism identified was autophagy maintenance, preserving the functional quality of tissue over time. Men who consumed higher dietary spermidine were maintaining healthier cellular environments in their tissue as they aged. Men who consumed lower dietary spermidine were experiencing the accelerated cellular debris accumulation that expresses as faster physical decline. The difference in spermidine intake between the highest and lowest dietary quartiles in that cohort was achievable with 2 tablespoons of wheat germ per day. But the spermidine mechanism is only part of what wheat germ does in aging muscle. Because what I found next, in the 1972 Curitin monograph, explains something about wheat germ that the modern cellular biology literature has not yet fully connected to the autophagy research. Dr. Thomas Curitin was director of the Physical Fitness Research Laboratory at the University of Illinois from 1941 through 1974. He was the most systematic exercise physiology researcher of his era in the United States, and his laboratory produced more longitudinal data on human physical performance across adult lifespan than any comparable institution of his time. In a 1972 research monograph, published through the University Press titled Physical Fitness and Dynamic Health, Curitin documented a decade of observations on a cohort of men between 45 and 72 who had been using a wheat germ oil supplement in his supervised fitness program. He was not studying spermidine. That compound would not be identified in wheat germ for another 4 decades. He was studying a long-chain alcohol compound called octacosanol that is concentrated in wheat germ oil. Curitin's data showed that consistent wheat germ oil supplementation in his older male cohort produced measurable improvements in reaction time, endurance, and what he called neuromuscular efficiency, which was his term for the ratio of physical output to perceived effort. Men who had been declining in physical performance tests showed a reversal of that decline after 12 to 16 weeks of consistent wheat germ oil consumption. The effect was not dramatic, but it was consistent across multiple years of observation and across multiple cohorts tested in the same protocol. Curitin reported his findings. He published his monograph, and the research on octacosanol in wheat germ essentially stopped within a decade as funding in athletic nutrition shifted toward the protein powder and amino acid research that the commercial supplement industry of the late 1970s and early 1980s was beginning to finance. There was no commercial constituency for wheat germ. It could not be patented. It could not be sold at a markup that justified marketing investment. Curitin's decade of data went into a university library, and sat there. I want to stop here and speak directly to the man I know is still watching at this point. You are somewhere between 57 and 73. You have been losing something in your physical capacity for long enough that you have started treating the loss as a fixed feature of your life rather than a solvable problem. Maybe you are down 15 or 20 pounds from your peak muscle mass. Maybe you are on a blood pressure medication or a cholesterol medication. Maybe your recovery after any physical effort takes longer than it used to, and the explanation you have settled for is that this is just what 61 or 65 or 68 feels like. You have a version of the skepticism I had 18 months ago. You have earned that skepticism the same way I did. When I first understood what declining autophagy was doing in my muscle cells, the first thing I thought about was my own situation. 61 years old, down 19 pounds of lean mass from my peak, with forearm grip that had been declining for 3 years in a way that embarrassed me privately even when nobody else noticed. I want to tell you what I added to my diet that same week, because you can add it tomorrow morning for under $2 in a single grocery purchase. Raw, untoasted wheat germ. Not toasted, raw. The toasting process that is applied to most commercially available wheat germ improves shelf stability and flavor by heating the germ to temperatures that significantly reduce the spermidine content and oxidize the octocosanol fraction that Curtin was studying. Raw wheat germ requires refrigeration after opening to prevent rancidity, which is the reason most commercial wheat germ is toasted. It is available at health food stores and in the natural foods section of larger grocery chains. Refrigerate the canister after opening and use it within 30 days. 2 tablespoons stirred into oatmeal, yogurt, or a glass of whole milk. No preparation beyond opening the canister, no cooking, no recipe. Eat it within the first 2 hours of waking. The specific timing matters for the reason I am about to explain, and it is the piece of this that I had wrong for the first 6 weeks before I understood why my results were inconsistent. Therefore, the timing question is the variable that most people who have tried wheat germ without consistent results have gotten wrong. Spermidine activates autophagy most effectively in a fasted or partially fasted cellular environment. When insulin is elevated from a recent meal, the mTOR pathway is active, and mTOR directly suppresses autophagy as a competing process. Spermidine delivered into a high insulin environment has significantly reduced autophagy activating effect because mTOR is winning the competition at the cellular signaling level. Eat the wheat germ before or at the beginning of your first meal, before insulin has risen significantly from carbohydrate absorption, and the spermidine enters a cellular environment where the autophagy pathway is least suppressed. Researchers from Medeo's group noted this timing dependency, specifically in a 2020 review in Nature Reviews Molecular Cell Biology. Curtin did not know the mechanism. He had observed that his cohort took the wheat germ oil first thing in the morning and had standardized that protocol empirically. The modern cellular biology explains exactly why his empirical timing was mechanistically correct. 2 tablespoons raw wheat germ, first meal of the day, before significant carbohydrate intake from the rest of the meal. That is the entire protocol adjustment. 6 weeks of consistent use at the correct timing before you evaluate results, because autophagy improvement at the cellular level does not produce a feeling within a week. It produces changes in the quality of your cellular environment that express as physical changes in recovery, grip, and endurance over a period of weeks as the damaged mitochondria that have been accumulating are progressively cleared and replaced by the normal mitochondrial biogenesis process. The first thing I noticed at roughly 4 weeks was recovery. Not strength, not size, recovery. The tightness that had been living in my forearms for 2 to 3 days after any grip-intensive work compressed into about 1 day. That compression was the first signal I had that something was changing at the cellular level in my muscle tissue. I kept going and started paying attention to the grip specifically because that had been the marker I was most concerned about. But here is the piece of this history that I could not find in any modern fitness literature, and that I only found because I was searching in a specific place for a specific reason. In the fall of 2022, I was searching digitized records from the National Strength and Conditioning Association's predecessor organization, the National Strength Coaches Association, which began keeping archival records from its founding in 1978. In a bound proceedings document from their 1986 annual conference, I found a presentation abstract from a researcher named Dr. Gary Buettner at the University of Iowa Free Radical and Radiation Biology program. Buettner had been studying the relationship between oxidative stress markers in skeletal muscle and dietary antioxidant intake in older male athletes. His abstract from the 1986 conference documented a finding from a small observational cohort that he described as requiring formal follow-up study. Men in his cohort who consumed wheat germ regularly as a dietary staple showed significantly lower levels of lipid peroxidation markers in their muscle tissue compared to age-matched controls with equivalent training loads and similar total antioxidant intake from other dietary sources. Buettner attributed the effect tentatively to the specific tocopherol profile in wheat germ, which contains all 8 forms of vitamin E, including the tocotrienol forms that most dietary surveys and most vitamin E supplements of that era measured inadequately or ignored entirely. He called for follow-up research. The follow-up research did not happen. Buettner's primary work was in free radical biology applied to cancer research, not athletic nutrition, and the 1986 conference proceedings were not widely read outside of strength coaching circles. The abstract sat in a bound document in an archive for 38 years before I found the reference to it while searching the proceedings index for a different paper. What Buettner was observing in 1986 without the vocabulary to explain it was exactly the cellular environment effect that Medeo's autophagy research and Curtin's octocosanol data were capturing from different directions. Lower lipid peroxidation in muscle tissue means less oxidative damage to mitochondrial membranes. Less oxidative damage to mitochondrial membranes means slower accumulation of the dysfunctional mitochondria that autophagy must clear. The wheat germ was slowing the rate of cellular deterioration that autophagy must work to reverse. Buettner was observing the protective side of the same mechanism that Medeo documented as the restorative side. The food was both slowing the accumulation of cellular debris and activating the system that clears it. That dual action is what no isolated protein source, no creatine supplement, and no amino acid formula can replicate, because none of them enters the cell's maintenance system from the inside. The complete practical protocol is this: 2 tablespoons of raw, untoasted wheat germ, refrigerated after opening, eaten at the beginning of your first meal every morning before significant carbohydrate intake from the rest of the meal. Continue for a minimum of 6 weeks before evaluating results. Cost is approximately 14 cents per serving from a standard canister at any grocery store with a natural foods section. Total weekly cost is under $2. Total preparation time is under 30 seconds. The men who ate wheat germ regularly through the 1960s and 1970s were not doing it with any awareness of spermidine or autophagy or mitochondrial quality. They were doing it because Adele Davis recommended it in Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit in 1954, because Curtin's work gave it a reputation in physical culture circles, and because it was cheap, available, and produced results that people who ate it consistently could feel in their bodies over time. The food did not change when the recommendations changed. The cellular mechanisms did not change. The only thing that changed was that a generation of nutrition guidance and commercial product development pointed people away from a 14-cent canister and toward products that cost 30 to 50 times as much and addressed none of the upstream cellular quality problem that was driving the decline. Buettner saw the evidence in 1986 and asked for follow-up research. Medeo produced the mechanistic explanation 23 years later. Curtin documented the functional effects in older men a decade before Buettner's conference abstract. 3 researchers across 5 decades were pointing at the same food from different methodological directions, and none of their work has ever been synthesized into a single, clear recommendation for the men who need it most. I am doing that synthesis now because the pieces were available to connect, and no one with a financial interest in this food has ever had a reason to connect them. I spent 8 years treating my cellular decline as a protein delivery problem. It was a cellular quality problem. The food that addresses it costs 14 cents. It has been in the baking aisle since before I was born. If you want to see exactly how I built the wheat germ protocol into a complete daily routine alongside the 2 other dietary changes I made in the same period, I put everything together in one place. I call it the aging-fix strength system. Nothing complicated. Just the exact steps I wish I had followed 15 years ago. You can check it out below. Now, I want one specific answer from you in the comments. Have you ever eaten wheat germ regularly at any point in your life, even if someone else in your household bought it and you ate it without thinking about it? Tell me when that was, and tell me your age now. Leave it below. I reply personally to every single comment. If this changed how you think about what is actually limiting your muscle quality after 50, subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. The next video covers the one cooking method that destroys 60% of the spermidine content in wheat germ and 2 other high spermidine foods before they ever reach your muscle cells, a destruction that is happening in most kitchens right now without anyone knowing it, and that takes a single 15-second adjustment to prevent completely. That video connects directly to everything in this one. Stay moving. I will see you there.